Good morning, everybody, and welcome to This Week in the News, a weekly one-half-hour conversation with the editors of peoplesworld.org. We have Teresa Albano, our co-editor, coming from Chicago. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, Joe.
And good morning, Sue Webb, our other co-editor, who is in New Haven. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning.
And I'm Joe, coming to you from my living room here in New York City. Um, well, let's get started. Did anybody hear Prince's new song devoted to the uprising in Baltimore? He had a big concert for peace there yesterday. Any Prince fans amongst us?
Love Prince.
Love Prince?
I love Prince. And I'm glad to hear that he did a song, but I have to say I didn't listen to it yet. So I can't say if I like the song or not. I'm sure I do. But what about you, Joe? I heard you listened to it already.
I did, and it's a great song. I found it on YouTube and uploaded it to Facebook yesterday morning, but I guess the person who uploaded it didn't have copyright, so YouTube took it down. And but I hear that the whole concert was broadcast on Jay-Z's channel yesterday, and I read this morning that it was a big success. And it had all of the attributes, according to the Washington Post, of a celebration. And fittingly so, I think, because there was a big victory there last week when the Baltimore Attorney General brought charges against those six officers. And also, I see that the People's World ran a story that the Baltimore Symphony also had a concert, I believe on Friday or Saturday. But we didn't get a chance to run the Prince story. I don't know if that shows a prejudice towards classical music above Prince's version of R&B and rock. I'm not quite sure what you call Prince's music. And we're joined by John Wojcik. Good morning, Wojcik. How are you?
Okay, good morning. How are you?
Great. We're just talking about the concerts over the weekend, the peace concerts sponsored by the Baltimore Symphony and the the musical recording artist Prince, celebrating victory in Baltimore with the Attorney General bringing charge. But it's a long struggle now to convict those officers, and I see that the Justice Department is investigating whether or not they're able to bring civil rights charges against the Baltimore Police Department for violating the civil rights. But that has a really high standard, right? You have to prove intent or something like that. Does anybody know anything about that?
Yeah, intent on the murder standard, sure. Actual intent to commit the act, not just as a result of, even if the activity is prejudicial against the victim, they still have to prove intent to kill. Like you say, it's a high standard. But also, Joe, those events, the concerts, they followed just by 2 days. Really an incredible development. The Maryland AFL-CIO, together with a lot of community organizations, youth groups, had gotten together. They launched a big voter registration drive. It's interesting that they're connecting voter registration with this, that involvement of people in the electoral process will help shape a body of lawmakers who could put tighter controls and prevent these kinds of problems, but also tackle some of the social and economic problems that create the conditions in the first place. So that's unique. That's the first time really that you have the national labor movement getting together with groups locally to do voter registration in response to one of these events.
Well, that's great, and certainly the electoral part of the struggle is going to be very important. Let's shift gears just for a minute. Wojcik and Terry and Sue, tomorrow there's going to be a vote in the Senate on granting Mr. Obama fast track. There's a procedural motion that would allow the Senate to reopen it if there were some things that they didn't like. And it appears to be a huge fight. And I'm not sure that the Obama administration thinks that they're going to win it. And there is a big controversy taking place between the president and the leader of the opposition to it, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts. And Wojcik, Obama says, the president says that Mrs. Warren is just being political, that she's dead wrong about this, that she's engaging in speculation about the problems with the. What's going on in that debate? Have you followed it?
Yeah, you know, and again, it's not speculation. Warren's opposition is based on very real, concrete experience with all of these trade agreements. Even the trade agreements that have protections for workers' rights, that had regulations in them built in to supposedly protect jobs, even those haven't worked. Witness the last the additions. They added these protections to the free trade agreement vis-a-vis Colombia. Since those protections were added, almost 1,000 union organizers and leaders have been shot or killed in Colombia. So she's speaking. It's not speculation. It's not guesswork. These trade agreements have not worked out for working class people in the United States. And I think what's really significant, you know, a lot of times in the past,
wait a minute, you're not blaming the trade agreement for the activities of the paramilitaries in Colombia, are you?
No, I'm not blaming the trade agreement for their activities. But what I'm saying is that the trade agreement encourages the government and encourages the government in Colombia not to do anything about those things. And it's those situations, those violations of workers' rights in Colombia are directly connected to the to the exporting of jobs from here. Like with NAFTA, it upset and unbalanced the Mexican economy, forcing a whole big spike in migration. You know, these free trade agreements are connected to everything else. But I think what's different, Joe.
Let me ask here. You know, what's the big deal about the trade agreements? Now they've got some pollsters, Sue, who and I recall us talking about this the other week, who say that women. Some pollsters from the Obama administration, according to the New York Times this morning, say women and Latinos and African Americans are in favor of the trade agreement. And I remember you saying, Sue, last week that people aren't opposed to trade. So what's the big deal?
Well, I think it has to do with you know, I'm reading a history book about a completely unrelated subject, and this prominent academic who's not a left-winger notes that free trade has always been used by great powers to advance their own interests, and I thought that was he's going back to the 19th century. Opening up China, if you remember, that was enforced by the British and so on in the name of freedom. I mean, it's a confusing topic, and as I said last time, I think we want to have trade, but we want to have it on terms that benefit working class people and not corporate interests. And the problem is that the weight of the power right now rests on these multinational corporations who want to have unlimited access to foreign markets and thereby disrupting those economies and then it leads to export of jobs here at home and so on and so forth. But it's a confusing issue. So it
Well,
sounds good.
finish your thought.
No, it sounds good, but as John said, the evidence has shown that these agreements have devastated working class communities in the United States and uh, in the countries that are on the receiving end of these agreements.
Now, they're
Joe?
also
Farmers.
arguing that, oh, Terry, you wanted to jump in here? Go ahead.
Well, just a case in point in whether or not I agree it's very complicated, and whether or not trade agreements in and of themselves are the only thing that has impacted economies, including our own economy. It seems that people believe that that is a big issue. And case in point is that the Baltimore Oriole official, I forget his name, but had talked about trade devastating the industrial base of Baltimore, which has led to then the problems and the economic issues that African American communities and other communities are facing in Baltimore as well. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the economy, but people see this too. Factories close up, move offshore, and so that's a big issue.
Sure, and another dimension of this thing is how it's playing out in terms of international relations, because they say that this is being used as a measure to push back against China, and and so while there is greater cooperation in other spheres, there's like economic war, taking place in these trade debates, and that certainly can't be a good thing. Why do you think the president is pushing so hard on this kind of thing? I mean, I'm afraid that it's going to hurt the chances of defeating the Republicans next year in the congressional and presidential elections. Or am I wrong? Anybody want to venture a guess?
Well, it's probably also related to his whole foreign policy of pivot to Asia as well, and having to, make sure there's a trade deal that goes along with that. As mentioned before, how trade and military often go hand in hand, opening up these markets for mainly capital.
Joe.
Right.
Joe?
Wojcik and then Sue.
Yeah, I also think there's a certain element here of pragmatism there, where the Obama administration feels that they can use this. They figure the forces behind and in support of a trade agreement are powerful and overwhelming, and they can make an accommodation here and maybe get some other things, quicker movement on appointments, on agreements for who would be the Attorney General, for example. There's a lot of that kind of back and forth that goes on, because the president, no matter who he or she would be, isn't the power here behind the throne in the United States politics. So that, I think,
lobbying, meaning bringing big suitcases full of money.
Yeah, right, exactly, and you need billions to run a campaign. So I think that's but what I think the Obama administration didn't count on, though, and you touched on this before, the opposition to this trade agreement is much broader and bigger than ever before, partly because the labor movement has reached out and brought in allies, but also partly because some of those allies, the issues with these trade agreements are growing and growing, like the environmentalists. They are really feeling it, and there's been environmental disasters now piled up on top of the economic things related to these trade agreements. So it's a big struggle. It's what really we should expect, is this conflicting forces here, and they're doing battle with each other.
Good point. Sue?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, let me say I think that Obama is the best president we've had in decades. And although I don't agree with all of his policies, but on the whole, both domestically and even I don't agree with a lot of his foreign policy, but it's clear that he has resisted the drive for military intervention on the whole, with some disastrous exceptions like Libya. But as John said, or kind of suggested, he doesn't control the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy is based on giant multinational corporations whose pursuit of the rule of capitalism is grow or increase your profits, increase your rate of profits, or die, because somebody else will gobble you up. And that's the logic that pushes a lot of these things. So it pushes a foreign policy, not of cooperation, because the logic of capitalism in our country is that these giant corporations have to keep on growing and growing and growing, and they do it by exploiting workers at home, but also the globe. So their interest is contradictory to cooperating with other countries and also to raising living standards in other countries. So you have a contradictory situation here, but that's the logic of the economy.
And speaking of the logic of the economy, if it's true that this pollster who was associated with the administration's campaign last time is arguing that women and minorities favor the TTP, and they're placing them in opposition to the labor movement. That's kind of an ugly thing to do. I mean, because it's women and minorities who will be hurt disproportionately over and above others when these lost, and so I hope that they're reading. Hi, doggy.
That was Cece. She was agreeing with you.
That's a good. Thank you for the intervention from your dog, Wojcik. It's a good marking point to move on. Since we're talking about foreign policy, let's talk about Cuba for a minute. The Pope had a meeting with the president of Cuba and convinced him to rejoin the Catholic Church. Terry, did I read that right?
No, I think you're overreading that one. But they did have a meeting, interesting. And, Raul Castro went to the Vatican, and basically, I think it was, a thank you to Pope Francis for helping to bridge, the breakthroughs that the U.S. and Cuba have made, and U.S. Under President Obama, which is a very important step that he's taken to normalize relations. But after the meeting, Raul Castro did say that that he's so impressed with the Pope, etc. He's thinking about perhaps rejoining the Catholic Church, and that was an interesting comment. He also added that the Cuban Party, Communist Party, does not allow believers, and that they're rethinking that, or they change that. At least that's how I read the comment in the New York Times. But I know that the Communist Party in the United States allows believers, absolutely, and has a lot of religious some liturgy even in its membership.
I know that, and I'm surprised at that. Because they have a very forward-looking point of view in other respects. So I'm surprised. We always say, our fight is with capitalism, not God. And and if the president of Cuba wants to rejoin the church, hey, that's his right, and more power to him. Speaking of developments on the other side of the Atlantic, Sue, there was a big election in England, Great Britain, yesterday, and all the polls were wrong. They thought it was very close, but the Conservatives won a victory. What the hell happened? Why did Labor take such a butt whooping? Sue, you got an
Well,
opinion about that?
I think it's a crisis that a lot of countries, Western countries are having, and to some extent in the United States. That is disillusionment with politicians and groups that fail to mount a full-throated defense of the 99% and the interests of working class people. And in an austerity drive, I read that the conservatives did not really increase their vote or their, I have to check the details here, but there was such disaffection, and you had in Scotland, where Labour has traditionally had a big base. Scotland is very working class and has, issues having to do with oppression and nationality and so on. The voters overwhelmingly, although they just recently overwhelmingly rejected Scottish independence, they overwhelmingly in this election backed the Scottish National Party, and it was seen as a disillusionment with Labour. It's certainly not an endorsement of the conservative policies either. So I think it's, there's been a struggle in Britain over the direction of the Labour Party. You had the so-called New Labour headed by Tony Blair that really followed the same kinds of policies, austerity and so on. And I think for us here in this country, messages too that I think we see we have very low voter turnout in this country. Why is that? Very low engagement. And I think people are looking for leadership and a real full-throated campaign to defend their interests. There was a lot of energy in 2008 around Obama, and let's see what happens this time. But that's what people are looking for.
Well, are the candidates this time drawing a lesson, Mrs. Clinton and Bernie Sanders? I mean, do you think that there's a understanding of that, or I mean, I heard she gave some speeches last week, Mrs. Clinton, on immigration, and she's made some very forward-looking statements on LGBTQ rights and marriage equality. And then there was a speech I heard the week before about racism and criminalization and reforming the police department and so on. So, are we going to see a full-throated defense of the 99%? Anyone? Wojcik?
Yeah, Joe, I think that's going to depend, and it's already been happening. That's going to depend on the strength of the movements, Labor, its allies, because no, Hillary Clinton is not a static, permanent force. Hillary Clinton today is not the same as Hillary Clinton 10 years ago. Same thing with Bill Clinton. Same thing with Barack Obama. With anybody, they are influenced by movements, and they reflect what is happening. And I think that explains Hillary Clinton's positions and some of the changes she's made in those positions. So when they talk about the new Hillary Clinton, I almost have to laugh a little bit. Is she really this progressive? Is she? The point with any of them is that they do respond to movements, and they do change their positions, and I think that some of her moves in a positive direction are a testimony, yes, to her, but also they also reflect changes that are taking place in the country. And then we have to see the vast difference between her and those right-wing extremists. I mean, there's obviously a wide world gulf between them, with Hillary Clinton being far, far better. She also has experience fighting.
Certainly, it's going to take a lot of public pressure. I mean, that's the only thing that we can depend on, right? I mean, our own ability to organize and fight back and raise the issues. I mean, isn't that going to be the most decisive thing? Speaking of which, in Chicago, Terry and Wojcik, there was a award given to victims of police torture. $2 million. Big thing, huh? And there were many different aspects of the award, including that these problems of police torture are going to be taught in the public schools as part of the settlement. Did I read that correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Terry?
Oh, well, I just, there's this police case that has, under the police command of John Burge, tortured many Chicago citizens, mostly African American, tortured into confession. And for years and years and years, and people went to jail and spent, innocent people because of this torture. And for years, the city denied that it even happened. And finally, after a civil suit, John Burge was put in jail for perjury, not for the torture. He still gets his pension. So after the city council passed this and Rahm Emanuel signed it, yes, there's a financial agreement. There's also this measure of the schools, teaching about it in the schools, and a couple of other important pieces. But I think the biggest also, and of course there's really probably no money that could, adequately, compensate for the years and the pain and the torture that these victims went through. But I think because this was also led by the victims themselves, it's a big moral and historic victory, really historic, and also I think nationally sends a signal as well, given the milieu of the police violence and issues of police crimes.
Well, it's one big victory, and we have to celebrate all of them, and so I think you're quite correct. You're watching This Week in the News, coming to you from the editors of peoplesworld.org. We invite you to our website at www.peoplesworld.org. We just have a couple minutes left, and speaking
Joe,
of struggle, yes?
I have to say, I got it a little wrong. The Cuban Party does allow, but it's a now.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. Otherwise, we were going to have to, next time we have a meeting, raise that issue, but so we can take that off of the agenda. Not that we can tell them what to do or anything like that. They run their own country and are proud of it. But speaking of struggle, Wojciech, we got 1 minute left. There's this ongoing fight to save the post office, and I understand they're having a big national day of action in a week or so. What's going on with the effort to end this effort to privatize the post office?
That's another example, Joe, that the budget cutters in Washington and the people who want to take advantage of any money that they can get their hands on and use it to privatize or make profits with, it's another good example of them not counting on the big fight back, not only from the post office workers, but the communities, organizations all around the country, the unions, civil rights groups filing lawsuits in towns that closing of a post office is discriminatory. I mean, this has become now a mass movement. It's really heartening and really encouraging to see this kind of a level of a fight back. People want that post office. They want their Saturday deliveries. This is a great American tradition, this post office, and now the movement is pushing for extra services that can be part of this public post office realm. Banking, which has been denied to unbanked people, millions and millions of poor people who are unbanked. All this stuff. This is great stuff. Hard to celebrate it all in 1 minute, but all I can say is it's good.
Well, that's taking place on May 14th at a post office near you. We encourage you to type in National Day of Action to save the post office and go out to the rallies and picket lines and support it. That does it for us. We want to wish everybody a great week. Encourage your friends and coworkers to check us out, and we will be back next Monday at 8 a.m. Thanks, and have a great day, guys. We'll be talking to you as the week goes
Bye,
on.
everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Talk to
Bye-bye.
you soon.
Bye.
Yep.